call the January 2019 Ann Arbor Energy Commission meeting in order at approximately 5 after 6. Would you call the roll, please?
Sure.
Benda.
Yep, I'm trying. Councilmember Eden.
Here.
Commissioner Hookham.
Here.
Commissioner Lenski.
Here.
Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
Commissioner Clevey.
Here.
Chair Appleyard.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
And we now have a new commissioner, Commissioner Zucker.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Approval of the agenda. Is there anything anyone would like to add to the agenda?
Somewhere in here, I'd like to talk about the updating the projections for solar in Ann Arbor, so it can be under new
Okay.
business or someplace.
Let's do it after the solar access draft resolution. Any other changes to the agenda? If not, I'll call for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the minutes. Everybody had a chance to look at the minutes.
Masterful.
I know that John had a couple of changes. If everyone else is happy with them?
I move they be approved with the changes as I submitted them. There were just some tweaks to
Yeah, no, they're good tweaks.
existing
too.
wording.
Tweaks instead of tweets.
Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We now come to the portion of our meeting where we can have public input. And we do have a few people in the audience, so if anyone would like to get up and say anything about energy, you have 3 minutes. Seeing no movement, I will call that closed and move on to the energy report.
All right. So per usual, we have kind of some internal and external news. I'll start with the internal news. We do have a meeting to look at turbines for pipes at the water treatment plant. So we're at the point where we're actually looking at possible applications for that. Thea has also been working a lot on it. So we have, I think tomorrow, we'll be going out there and seeing if they're a viable option for our water treatment plant.
What kind of scale would that be as far as?
So to begin, I think it's probably going to be more of a pilot to see how applicable it is. And then there's a chance if it goes well to build it out.
So
So
discharge water, right?
What's that?
The discharge water?
I'm sorry.
The discharge water?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I also am currently looking at the landfill gas system and seeing what it would take to basically power a wheeler with it. We're looking at some of the numbers as far as usage in the area, also conduit costs and other things that go involved with maintenance and operations is something else that we're exploring as an option. And then finally, some really good news. We've been looking at fire stations for basically installing solar, and we're currently working with our attorneys to see if there's a way to get volunteer labor similar to what Strensky has done in Ypsilanti for the city of Ann Arbor, and things are looking promising. So there is some great all around news. Yeah.
Great.
As far as external news, there's some not so good outcome as far as the solar tax exemption. Wayne, I don't know if you want to maybe give a little bit of background, or John, anyone who.
Basically, in December, the legislature passed an exemption. It was a package of 2 bills. One had to do with commercial and the other had to do with residential. And they were tied together, and our former Governor Snyder decided that there was something wrong with one of the bills as far as it dealing with new equipment but not existing equipment, I believe, and so he vetoed them. So we thought we were through having taxing solar in Michigan, but now we're going to have to go through the process again. everybody, it came as a big surprise to everybody.
Big surprise.
Nobody expected that, and we're not really sure how long it'll take, but it seems, everybody seems to be fairly certain that they'll fix what was wrong with it and run it through fairly quickly. But we shall see.
So I have a few observations on that. I'm on the board of directors of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, and they have taken some umbrage over the way that was done. There are some lawyers now involved to see whether or not that you can veto a piece of legislation based on faulty information. That's one of the issues that's being looked at. The other question is, having led the tax fight on this in the first place and kind of looked at how to get this done, as John and many of you know, that not all the communities in Michigan tax solar. In fact, a small number do, which means that it's a non-issue for most other communities. So changing the law was really difficult because we couldn't get enough people, representatives, senators, and congressmen whose constituents were concerned about this to get enough of a wave of people to build a coalition and to get this passed. It languished in the House under Representative Irwin for 8 years, in fact. Couldn't even get it out of the Finance Committee to move it forward. The genius, and I want to say this in the highest regard and respect for the Republicans that led this charge, that they pushed this issue of solar taxation in a bipartisan way and took leadership on it because it made sense to everybody, and they built a win-win coalition among Republicans and Democrats. And in the House, only 2 people voted against it, and in the Senate, it was unanimous consent to do this. So the question going forward is, does a Republican House and Senate want to hand a new Democratic governor a win on solar taxation when hardly any of their constituents are mad about it and pushing them? So I think that Republicans in the state displayed extremely wise leadership in building this. It's going to be hard to know whether that coalition and those good bipartisan feelings will hold forward. Representative Irwin is already trying to build a new coalition of Republicans and Democrats to put this forward again, and there's a lot of hope that he and Senator Barrett will take the lead on this and get this done. But it's not a slam dunk that, well, we'll just fix this one thing and put it back in. The politics of solar taxation has changed significantly and dramatically thanks to our previous governor's decision to veto renewable energy legislation in the state that had the highest support of both parties of any renewable legislation, dating all the way back to the solar tax stuff under Governor Blanchard. So if you see him, and you will, because he's coming back to Ann Arbor, see him, remind him of this. Thank you.
On other energy news, it was reported that the U.S.'s greenhouse gas emissions are up again this year.
Up a lot.
They had been dropping, but they are up between 3% and 4%, so we've got a lot more work to do.
A lot.
And that's with all of the significant changes getting away from coal, so that's unfortunate. Other energy news? Okay. We'll move on to P-cycling presentation.
I can
Something
provide
about
just,
you're in denial or something?
What was that?
I'll just provide like 1 minute of context
Sure,
for
go
this,
ahead.
since I invited Stephen to join us here this evening after consulting with our illustrious chair here. I serve on the board of the Center for Sustainable Systems at U of M, and Stephen presented this research that he's been doing to that board, and I thought it would be of interest to this commission. So lots of environmental impacts, of which energy is one, and I think it's a fascinating topic and kind of outside what we have discussed typically as a commission, but one of the things we sometimes find ourselves challenged to do is to find opportunities that are really in municipal scope. So much of what's happening is controlled or largely controlled outside of what a municipality can do. So this was of interest to me because of that. So thanks, Stephen.
Thanks so much for having me. Let's see. All right. Okay. So, as she mentioned, my name is Stephen Hilton. I'm a master's student at the School for Environment and Sustainability and the College of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I am part of a group that is looking at urine diversion and recycling, otherwise known as P-cycling. And what I've been looking at is the environmental impact of doing this to see if it will actually reduce environmental impacts. I'm part of a bigger team with Bo and Joe, Drs. Keolian, Deiger, Skurlos, and Love. So when I tell people I'm working on a thesis looking at urine, the first question is usually, why would you do that? And the reason is there are some major inefficiencies in our systems. So we use a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers to grow our food. To get these, we need to extract considerable amounts of natural gas. We need to do phosphate mining, which is a destructive process, and there are concerns about the longevity of phosphate rock. So then we apply this to our food, and then when this gets to our wastewater treatment plant, we use a lot of energy and nutrients to get rid of these nitrogen and phosphorus that we need so much. What we'd like to do instead is to return these to the field. Doing so would reduce the amount of mining and energy we would need to get nitrogen and phosphorus, and it could reduce the energy and chemicals we need to get rid of the nitrogen and phosphorus at the wastewater treatment plant itself. So some of the special things about urine, which is a phrase that's not uttered at most public meetings, is that it's only about 1% of the volume of wastewater, but it has about 70 to 80% of the nitrogen and about 50 to 60% of the phosphorus. So if you could collect this small amount of urine, you could have a long-term renewable supply of phosphorus and nitrogen fertilizers. So what we're looking to do here and have been working on is see if this has lower environmental impacts than what we currently do for wastewater treatment and fertilizer making. And to do this, we have been using life cycle assessment, where we're looking at all of the inputs like electricity, chemicals, all of the mining we're having to doing, and all of the outputs, all the emissions, to see if this is better for the environment and in what ways. Life cycle assessment is commonly used to do things like seeing if something is better for the environment, to see ways you can improve something's environmental performance, and is often used in some policies. So to compare these, we're looking at the flush water we're making for toilets. We're looking at collecting this wastewater, treating wastewater, and then making fertilizer, whether it's from urine or if it's from mineral sources. We are currently looking at the operations phases, so we haven't assessed putting in the infrastructure required to do this yet. The way we're comparing these systems, because they are kind of different, is we're making sure all scenarios we run have the same amount of wastewater treated, and the same amount of nitrogen and phosphorus treated. So each scenario will have the same amount of people having their wastewater treated and the same amount of fertilizer overall. And the way we're trying to see if this is better for the environment is looking at a couple things. So we're looking at the greenhouse gases from all these activities, the energy being consumed, water consumed, potential for acidification and eutrophication or potential algae blooms. So what the conventional system starts by putting a lot of effort into making a lot of very clean flush water. This is then taken to the wastewater treatment plant with all the other wastewater and mixed. We then use a lot of energy and chemicals to clean this wastewater to make it safe for other sources. We then separately, again, make those synthetic fertilizers using energy, natural gas, phosphate rock. We have looked at two different urine diversion scenarios. So in these, we make less total flush water. We then collect most of this urine. We looked at 70% just to see what it would look like on a large scale. After we collect it, we stabilize the urine. We produce a fertilizer from it and then ship that out. And then we also are modeling wastewater treatment on here to see how much energy and chemicals you would save by reducing all of the nitrogen and phosphorus inside wastewater itself. So all of that has been looked at as well. Because there are many different factors that could change how well urine diversion does in different places. So we looked at things like the types of wastewater treatment plants in different locations. So we looked in Vermont, Michigan, and Virginia. Some just looked at one wastewater treatment plant. Some looked at wastewater treatment plants throughout the entire state. So some of them were stricter than the others. For example, the Virginia treatment plant is on the Chesapeake Bay, which has some of the strictest nutrient removal standards. So that's a place that could really benefit from something like urine diversion. And we also looked at plants throughout Michigan and Vermont. We also used the electricity grids from those states. So Vermont has the cleanest electricity in the United States, and there are some differences between Vermont and the other states. Since we had already made this model, we did a little quick simulation of a place similar to Ann Arbor. We can call it Ann Harbor for the purpose of this presentation. So we used the electricity grid that's supplying this area. We looked at how we treat drinking water and how we treat wastewater here to make something, again, similar but not exactly the same as Ann Arbor, just as a quick little comparison. So if we look at, when looking at the total environmental impacts, you can see there's these gray bars that are the conventional system, and beneath that are the orange and blue bars, which are urine diversion systems. What this is showing is that the environmental impacts in the vast majority of categories are much lower for these urine diversion systems. So you can see somewhere from 25 to 35% reduction of greenhouse gases from these specific activities. You can see a large reduction in energy, water, and eutrophication. The big exception here is you may see one blue bar that's taller than all the rest. To make one of the, in one of our scenarios, we make a fertilizer that requires sulfuric acid. So in that one, there are some side effects of extra acidification potential that could happen. This graph is looking at Virginia, which is that poster child of that treatment plant that's incredibly strict. If we look at the quickly run Ann Arbor simulation, we still see some very significant benefits. They may not be as large because we are not treating to Chesapeake-based standards, but we're still seeing reductions of greenhouse gases in those activities somewhere from 20%, a large reduction in energy and other impacts. So we're going to take a little look at what's changing in the actual system itself. So we're benefiting by producing less flush water, by changing how we treat wastewater, and we are benefiting largely by offsetting synthetic fertilizers. But to do this, we do have to collect, stabilize urine, and then turn it into a fertilizer and send that out, and that does have an impact associated with it. So some of the big pros, changing how much flush water we use. This significantly reduces how much we need for flushing. Urine diverting toilets use about half as much water as low flow toilets, which are better than what many people have currently. So one very solid finding is a good way to save water is by using less water. You can quote us on that one. Looking at wastewater treatment, you can kind of tell as you have stricter effluent standards, those plants will start to benefit more from urine diversion. So you can see this boxed bar. That is a plant similar to Ann Arbor's, where they have pretty substantial reductions in greenhouse gases from things like having less electricity or needing less, or doing less things to remove phosphorus. It's not benefiting as much as that Virginia plant to its right, but it is still benefiting quite a bit. And the biggest pro is not having to make as much synthetic fertilizers from natural gas and phosphate rock. So if, nitrogen fertilizers come from natural gas, there's a big carbon footprint associated with those. There are many environmental impacts with phosphate fertilizers as well. In most scenarios we looked at, you needed to offset fertilizers for total environmental benefits. So as long as that was happening, you were reducing total greenhouse gases. Some of the downsides, you do have to stabilize urine. So we add a lot of vinegar to urine to stop it from clogging up our pipes. And we also modeled collecting urine. You may be aware there are not many large-scale collection systems of urine. So this is one part of our model that was a little more uncertain than the others because we didn't have as much to base it off of. In addition, while making these fertilizers has much lower impacts than making regular fertilizers, there are still definitely impacts associated with doing that. So some of the major takeaways, implementing year diversion is something that could be very difficult, but if it was done on a large scale, you would have significant environmental benefits. In all the locations we looked at, there were large decreases in total environmental impacts. So we reduced greenhouse gases by a pretty wide range, reduced how much water we used, reduced the potential for algae blooms. We either slightly decreased the acidification or increased it a lot, depending on how we made our urine fertilizers. We're benefiting a lot from reducing our flush water, changing how we treat wastewater, and offsetting synthetic fertilizers. But to do that, we again have to collect, stabilize urine, turn it into a fertilizer, and ship that out. So some of the biggest factors here are the electricity grid being used. If you save a lot of electricity in a place that's supplied by solar energy, that's not as big of a deal as if you save electricity in a place supplied by coal. How you treat your wastewater, so if you're a place with very strict standards, you would lower the impacts of just treating wastewater. But if it was a place that was less strict, you may change how much nitrogen or phosphorus would go into the wastewater, since less is coming into the treatment plant itself. And then it also depends how we're collecting urine and how we're turning it into fertilizers. If we're looking at this Ann Arbor scenario, we see that it could be a municipal strategy that would lower some energy and greenhouse gas emissions. Again, this was not everything about Ann Arbor. This was just a place pretty close to Ann Arbor. So it reduces energy in a lot of areas, such as secondary treatment and wastewater treatment plants. That's where the majority of the energy is consumed there, and has mostly the largest impacts. And something you kind of see in quite a few life cycle assessments is that a lot of the benefits happen in the supply chain. So if you looked within the bounds of Ann Arbor, you may see greenhouse gas emissions or energy consumption that's pretty close to where we started. But when you look in the supply chain, you have significant benefits because you're not making chemicals to remove phosphorus. You're not making fertilizers from natural gas. So far, we've published a report and made an Excel tool, which we used for the Ann Arbor scenario. We are currently working on a journal article. There is quite a bit of work that could be done. There are some groups looking kind of into the economics of this and some of the best places to implement it. There's a lot more we can look into, how we make our fertilizers, how to make them better. And as you may have noticed, urine diversion isn't a common thing, so actual more field trials in places other than the second floor bathroom in the G.G. Brown building on University of Michigan could be implemented. Does anybody have any questions? And if you would like to contact me, my email is below Yuri. Yes.
I like your presentation. I think it's a great
Thank
idea. Just an observation.
Yes.
In the mid-'90s, Congressman Nolenberg from Southeast Michigan, he had a campaign slogan to keep the government out of our bathrooms, and he led the legislative effort that blocked low-flow toilets. His legislation was co-sponsored with Newt Gingrich and Congressman Bob Walker from Pennsylvania, collectively known as the Three Stooges. But I guess I would say, no good idea goes unpunished, and it'd probably be worthwhile to take a look at the industries or those interests that would not want to see this happen, and begin to figure out how to co-opt them early on. When we got into the opposition from Congressman Nolenberg, why he hated low-flow toilets so much, it was because he got major campaign contributions from the plumbers. So I don't know if this uses less piping, but you got all the good ideas down there. I would advise you to take a look at who loses when you do this, and co-opt them early.
We may have the plumbers on our sides, because this would be a lot of piping that would need to be installed.
Yeah.
So we may have that one very specific demographic covered.
An important demographic.
Yes, very important demographic, apparently. There's actually another part of the team that's kind of looking at people's reception of this kind of idea, and they have been interviewing various stakeholders. So there is a group kind of trying to see who might not like this, what the support level would be, which is very important, because if you can show this has great environmental benefits, but then nobody wants to do it, it's more of just a publication. So,
excellent.
So I assume that in your calculations, you figured in how much energy it takes and everything to grow whatever you make the vinegar out of?
So yeah, we actually, so we used a database called SEMAPro. This is something commonly used in life cycle assessments, and they have looked at the impacts of making vinegar. Pretty much, we got a source that was pretty much around the United States. So we had the environmental impact of making the vinegar itself on there. And that was one of the bigger factors. It was not like the biggest factor, which might be things like making sulfuric acid for your some of your fertilizers and some of the collection aspects. But
So there are things called composting toilets.
yes,
And they maintain that they get high-grade liquid fertilizer out of it directly, and that you can actually use it on plants
there's actually
without any,
of this intensive treatment.
yes.
Yeah, there's actually, we actually have one of those in the Dana building at Seas. The kind of benefit to this, I guess composting toilets have been a lot more common, more in like rural areas or further out. This is something that could potentially be like implemented in a large building. So you could put this in a school building, in an apartment building. You could put this in new developments or make renovations. So this is something that it would definitely take effort, but could kind of work within the existing system. Whereas composting toilets are still a great option, and there are some places that those would work very well. The ideal is this would be one option in addition to those.
There are two out at Leslie Science Center
Oh, really?
that actually see about 30,000 kids a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and they've been there for, I don't know, 15 years or something like that now. So, but on the other thing that comes up is actually getting this approved.
Yes.
And I personally have tried to actually get composting toilets approved in Washtenaw County and have had significant problems. For the most part, the county doesn't want to see them. Although other parts of Michigan, including the State Plumbing Review Board, have no problem with them. So urine diversion might have a similar educational issue with local officials.
Yes.
A couple of comments.
Okay.
First of all, this might also be of interest to the Environmental Commission.
Okay.
So I don't know, maybe a
Yeah.
repeat performance there. Also piggybacking on Mark's and Wayne's comments, Commissioner Cleavey and Chair Appleyard, I think what you're hearing from us is that there are other non-technical related issues to this. And it might be worthwhile in partnering with the Ford School of Public Policy to look at, the issues on the political side, on the lobbying side. Who's going to, there's probably not a pea lobby, but there's a fertilizer and a natural gas lobby. So those kinds of, if you get to a certain point, then working on the policy side, to me, makes sense. And just the last comment is this done at scale anywhere else in the world, like in a developed country in Europe or in Asia?
So most of the implementations they've had them like up to neighborhood sizes so far. So a lot of those have been a little like more decentralized. So you would have a collection center in the middle of the neighborhood or in the middle of a couple different apartment complexes. Other than that, there are a couple like university and institutes that have them implemented in large scales. South Africa, somewhere in South Africa, they have a decently large installation. This has not yet been done on an entire town scale yet. This was kind of just to get a feel for if this were done on the town scale, what might be the environmental impacts we could expect.
And I can comment on that.
Yes.
In one of my earlier day consulting projects, which now is coming to fruition surprisingly, in places like Phoenix and in Texas, they've actually implemented this. And now in Phoenix, I'm told, this year, we're going to see rules where they can direct inject wastewater from a wastewater treatment plant into drinking water. So, yeah, it'll be unique. We've been fighting this for a long time, and imagine the public pushback on that. Where's your water coming from, really?
They do that in Gaza.
The thing that I see a parallel, you might want to look into Phoenix, because there's been a ton of work done on that.
Okay.
Texas, too, has some work done. But we did the life cycle review of this because there was energy and greenhouse gas issues. So we even a number of years ago, we looked into this. I think the thing with Michigan that draws a little bit of parallel here is as our source water becomes contaminated, are there going to be some other drivers externally to this whole solution that might make sense? So I'm not sure our water's gotten to that state yet, but there are places in this world where the drinking water is quite bad. Maybe there is some logic to putting something like this in situational areas like that.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a tough sell in Ann Arbor, maybe gradual, but I think there's opportunities there.
I don't know, we have PFAS in our water, so, you know.
But Phoenix is doing this, and in
Yes.
fact, the wastewater reuse process, other than putting it in drinking water, they use it on golf courses and everywhere else.
A lot of
So it's-
irrigation.
Yeah, used pretty commonly.
Yeah, I think there was other issues with, I think California had a failed implementation earlier on, and I think they've started trying to redo that. But yeah, there's definitely been some significant political barriers in the past, so. Yeah.
Other questions, comments from commissioners?
I just wanted to quickly thank you for the presentation and also reiterate John's point. I have been in conversations with the Environmental Commission. If you are willing to do a presentation, I think they would very much
Okay.
welcome it. So,
That sounds great, thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for taking
awareness, yeah.
thanks for letting me take your time to talk about urine. Most people don't do that, so. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, it was a great presentation. You're in a class by your own. Moving right along, we're going to get a Tübingen?
Tübingen.
Germany energy presentation.
Josh,
It's spelled
I should go to the podium to do that, right?
Yeah.
Is it loaded?
Yeah, the PowerPoint should be up there.
Don't hit your head.
Sorry,
It was too good to finish.
especially since I was not doing so well with the first one.
So good evening, fellow commissioners, and the audience, and others maybe on closed circuit TV. I offered to present this presentation that was actually presented by representatives from Tübingen in Ann Arbor when they visited in late October and early November. Very briefly, Tübingen is a sister city. It's the first sister city. Ann Arbor has, I believe, 6 sister cities. And Tübingen was the first sister city of the city of Ann Arbor. And there's been regular exchanges between the two communities. And last year, there was a contingent of 15 people from Tübingen that came to the United States, spent some time in Washington, D.C., and then here in Ann Arbor to sort of observe and become informed about the election process in the United States. And there were a number of different activities in Ann Arbor, including an event at Spark, where there were 3 council people from Ann Arbor and 3 also from Tübingen that talked about some environmental type issues related to both communities, as well as some other issues that were sort of prevalent in both of the 2 sister cities. So I'm going to present what was shown at that meeting, and this is about Tübingen's climate change related activities. Their motto is Tübingen goes blue, and that doesn't have anything to do with the University of Michigan and going blue. Actually, the German term is Tübingen macht blue, which means basically Tübingen makes blue. I don't know why the color blue, but that's their motto. And it's a program that was implemented by their mayor in 2008. And there's some statistics in here that I thought you might be interested in, but also some information about Tübingen as a sister city. So Tübingen is a university town like the United States. It's situated on a river. It was also grown up around a number of mills, just like Ann Arbor did, so there's a lot of similarities between the town. You can see in terms of the size of the city, about the same size as Ann Arbor, with roughly the same size of students, a little bit less. Town is a little bit older, founded in, or the university is a little bit older, founded in 1477. And you can see that like Ann Arbor, the university and the hospital clinics there are the largest employer in the town. Since 1993, it's been a member of the European Climate Alliance, and they see the same kinds of things that we're seeing in Ann Arbor, growth in population, and then also a growth from growing industry and employment, mostly clean type of industry, but nonetheless, there's consumption of energy related to that job growth. Tübingen in 2003 implemented a guideline called Sustainable City Development with targets set for 2030. It included some traffic planning and also looked at the activities related to transportation and mobility within the city and development also within the city bounds. Again, these are kinds of topics that are challenging us in Ann Arbor and potentially could be of interest if we wanted to do some additional sharing of experiences and solutions. This has been a focal, as I said, since 2007. This campaign was kicked off in 2008. Other things that they're looking at, in addition to the ones that I mentioned before, are things like childcare, municipal finances, and climate protection in general. So in terms of policy goals, they implemented a set of policy goals related to climate action in November of 2015. The goal was to achieve a 25% reduction in the energy use and related to carbon dioxide compared to 2014, reducing that by 25% by 2022. They have already achieved that goal, achieving a 30% reduction already by 2018. And we'll get to some of the reasons why that is. The municipality and subsidiary companies, and what they mean by that is they have a municipal utility there. So that's a big advantage. They wanted to set an example for climate protection. They wanted to build infrastructure that provides options for energy savings and for climate protection. And they wanted to inform the community about environmental protection and how climate plays a role in that, as well as energy savings and how to motivate citizens to participate in the goal achievement. So one of the things that they're doing is funding of photovoltaic systems. There's incentives and in place for solar on both residential and commercial properties. The local provider, as I mentioned, is a municipal utility. It installs photovoltaic systems and funds the photovoltaic construction of both residential and corporate installations. And there's an obligation to install photovoltaic systems as a part of property purchase contracts. So it's somewhat similar to what was recently enacted in California, where there has to be solar installations with new construction. So this is pretty dramatic. This shows the number of systems that they had in 2007 when the campaign was kicked off. At that time, they had 1,177 systems, and by 2018, they had 12,500 systems in place. So there was a tenfold increase over that period of time in terms of systems. I don't know what the growth was in the number of kilowatt hours generated or in the ratings of the systems. Presumably, it was something similar to the same level of increase, but that's really pretty dramatic, especially compared to what we've seen here in Ann Arbor. So the utility provider, they have already converted to 100% green electricity for all municipal operations. So what essentially that is equivalent to is the target that we've set for Ann Arbor, that we are 100% clean and renewable. And on the electric side, in Tübingen, they are already 100% clean and renewable. Other public institutions have followed. I don't know exactly what that means. I assume these are other kinds of public entities that are within the bounds of Tübingen. They have also moved to 100% green electricity. As you can see here, citizens receive €100 for buying what they call a pedelec, but that's an e-bike for using green energy. And they also get some other incentives. For example, they get an incentive like is offered in Michigan by utilities and elsewhere for example, switching out an old refrigerator for a new refrigerator. That can be up to €100. They also can finance improvements on, for example, upgrading their envelope. So if a home owner is doing a major renovation, they can actually get additional up to €500 for doing that, and they can also get, how do you say it, basically like a mortgage for doing the work, and the payback of that mortgage is handled through the utility bill, where they basically then pay the loan back to the municipal utility. So that they have some interesting mechanisms in place to be able to promote their program. And as you can see here, if you're looking across the entire city, the goal of reaching 50% reduction from, or excuse me, 50% from renewables, the target was to achieve that by 2020, and that was reached by 2017. So again, in summary, in terms of municipal operations, they're 100% renewable already, and in terms of city-wide, community-wide, they're already at 50% renewables. This is also pretty significant. The scale is not going to zero, so don't let the y-axis fool you a little bit. But nevertheless, they've had a significant reduction in power consumption per inhabitant. It's down 13% over that time period. And it would be interesting, Joss, I sent you an email, I don't know if you can provide that to us later, but I asked for what our power consumption is per inhabitant. It might be also a metric that we may want to track here in Ann Arbor. In fact, I think we even talked about that when we had the metric subcommittee, that we would consider looking at that. Or we also looked at some other things in terms of power consumption per square foot of building space or something like that. A building energy intensity metric. But you can see they've reduced in roughly, and this is 10 years, this only shows through 2015, I don't know why they ended it there, but they achieved a 13% reduction over that time path, or time frame, with the actions that they've implemented. And in terms of CO2 emissions per capita, they have also, during the same time frame, 2006 to 2015, reduced those by 30%. Again, I don't know what happened since then. I know that there has been some flatlining in terms of Germany in total, in terms of their CO2 reductions, because they have been shutting down their nuclear power plants. And basically, in terms of Germany across the entire country, they have not reduced their greenhouse gas reductions, but their last nuclear power plant will be taken offline by either 2021 or 2022. And so that may have also some influence on individual communities like Tübingen. I've actually looked at their website. They have a website for this initiative, Tübingen Goes Blue. And you can see it here. The problem is it's all in German, as you might expect. So looking at it really probably doesn't get you a whole lot. A couple of other things that they're doing that was not in the presentation. I talked with the councilman afterwards. And one of the things that the city does, or potentially it's the municipal utility, is the German government provides retraining for unemployed people in Germany. And that's done at both the federal and the state level. And what Tübingen has done is they are providing training for unemployed individuals to become energy consultants and auditors. So people within the city limits in Tübingen are being trained to do this. They're gaining new skills. They have to go through, let's see, I made a note here, 12 full days of training to become certified. And those people then are going out into the city and conducting energy audits and consultations for the benefits of the residents. It's not clear to me, and I couldn't find it on the website, and I didn't have time, I didn't look at this earlier, but I don't know how those individuals are compensated, whether they're compensated by the utility or by other measures. Another thing that the municipality is doing is they provide training for people in entities that are responsible for building energy management. So people that are doing building management and they're paying the utility bills and they're switching out the light bulbs and things like that. They train those people in energy efficiency measures, and they have some type of revenue or savings sharing plan in place where 50% of the savings through the measures taken flow to the entity or stay with the entity, and 50% somehow flow back into the community. That may pay for the training, that may pay for these people that are being retrained that are unemployed. But they're obviously looking at this holistically and using savings from energy reduction activities and the expenses to be able to plow those back into the utility. And just a few other things. The mayor of Tübingen, who kicked this off in 2007, 2008, he was recently awarded the European Climate Star for 2018. And as you can see here, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was the governor of California, was also recognized with the Climate Star Award. So Tübingen is quite proud of their activities. And Tübingen wants to know if we're going blue too. So I don't think we have to answer that tonight, but I thought that it might be interesting to see what our sister city is doing in Germany. And you get a sense that not only what we hear sort of generally, but specifically, many European cities are way ahead of us in terms of what they're doing and the kind of reductions that they've already achieved. And by the way, it would be interesting if we got the statistics from Josh. Typically, the Europeans are starting already at levels much, much lower than ours in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of their energy consumption per individual, and yet they were still able to make significant improvements both in consumption per individual as well as total greenhouse gas reduction. So they're doing a good job. Any questions? Yeah, Mark.
John, I think we can't understate the role of the municipal utility in this.
For sure.
So they're in a position actually to do a lot. I would encourage you to share this report with two places in Michigan. First one is the Michigan Municipal Association, which is MMA, which is down the street. You know, their cities and townships and others are their members, and also more importantly, the Michigan Municipal Utility Association. There's 42 cities in Michigan that are municipal utilities who have the legal structure to do what these guys are doing. They may not have the wherewithal, but Lansing's a municipal, a lot of places.
Kansas, Traverse City. Yep.
Right. So I would think they might be interested in this, and might be able to get something moving.
Duly noted. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm curious, John, if you can speak to the role of regulations and building standards, like either locally or nationally in Germany?
I don't know how they compare to U.S. standards. I know generally speaking, Wayne might have some insight from his background, but generally speaking, the energy standards in Europe are, tremendously higher than what they are here. But that's been the case for a long time. In a lot of, for example, the passive house design standards, those originated in Germany. And there's just a handful of those kinds of buildings in place in the United States and Canada also too. And actually, there's even a hospital in Frankfurt that is being designed and built to passive house standards. So this is not just residential scale, they're applying this at a larger scale. And it's also then, frankly, an indication for the University of Michigan that's now looking at making a commitment of carbon neutrality, that when they say, well, this is very difficult to do for the medical system, if an entire hospital is being built to passive house standards in Germany, that some of the expansions that the university hospital system is looking at could be done there. But I know, I have personal friends in Germany. I worked for a German company for 37 years. They renovated a house, and this was a stone house that had insulation on the inside. When they renovated it and redid the envelope, they replaced all the windows. They added something like 7 inches of insulation on the outside of the house and then restuccoed the outside of the house. So they're really much, much more aware than we are. But honestly, they're also incentivized for doing it because the utility costs are quite a bit higher there. So the two, the energy standards are a lot higher, but also the utility costs are higher, so the payback is better.
They also, for a long time, and I'm not sure exactly where it sits now, they had a law that said that if you installed solar and fed it into the grid at all, that you got paid basically for,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it guaranteed a return on your investment.
They did. They did.
It gave you an incentive way above what the cost of the electricity was.
Correct.
So,
Right.
Was it
I'm
what they
pretty
call a
sure
feed-in tariff?
those have expired. That was the case in Germany, also in Spain, and particularly like in Spain where they had the budget issues, they let those kinds of incentives expire. But yeah, if you drive around Europe, whether it's Germany or elsewhere, particularly in Germany, you see solar installations all over the place. I mean, this is,
That's why they have
this
so
is a
many
town
in
of
town.
88,000 people. Remember, that's a town of multiple people are living per dwelling, and there were 12,500 solar installations in a town of 88,000 people.
John,
So-
I think that slide said it was peak kilowatts.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It wasn't number of installations.
Oh, it wasn't?
No.
Yeah.
Slide 8.
Let's see, photovoltaic systems.
KW
So-
peak.
Peak, yep, you're right, okay. Yep, so that was not
It's
the
still
number.
12.5
So
megawatts.
that's
It's
still a
significant.
significant, yeah.
So John-
Kilowatts peak, yep. Thanks you for catching that.
So John,
Yes?
do you know what the relationship between local and state government is there? So much of what we would like to do, we're prohibited from doing by our state government.
Right. It's not an issue in Germany, as far as I know, because the federal government and the state government have been big promoters of greenhouse gas reductions. And so I don't think you see the kinds of issues that you see here in Ann Arbor, where energy building standards are much lower than what we would like to see practiced here in Ann Arbor and enacted, and we're obviously prevented from having higher standards. Here, the standards are already high at the federal level and at the state level, so I don't think they have those kinds of issues as well. So clearly, the regulatory environment has a big impact on what the city can do. The fact that it has a municipal utility also has a big impact as well. I mean, they're taking revenue from that municipal utility and plowing that back into energy efficiency measures, to training of people, those kinds of people going out into the community and doing audits. It just speaks for what that kind of benefit could be for cities like you're talking about, for Lansing and Traverse City and other municipal utilities.
Or Ann Arbor,
Or Ann Arbor, someday, never know.
a couple steps away.
Right. Any other questions?
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Should I just leave this up or get out, or which?
Yeah, usually.
Leave it, okay, thanks.
Well, that was enlightening. Next on the agenda, solar access draft resolution. Commissioner Hookham.
So Josh passed out a update of what I presented in December at our workshop. There were a few changes made. I can point those out before we carry it forward, maybe online with what we're looking at. In essence, I got some feedback regarding why are we doing this, and I guess one of the big drivers is I have not personally had this happen, but it could easily happen in where I'm living. But I have had friends who put in solar systems. They're called SESs in this document. And the investment's not inexpensive. And with taxes you have to pay on it, it adds even more life cycle dollars to what you're investing. And to have you build one, a landowner build one, and then have their next door neighbor decide to build an extension to their building that's higher and block all access to the solar system, maybe even just part of the shading is added, but I know in one instance it's pretty much a significant component of the annual solar irradiation is blocked now. It doesn't seem fair. You've spent all these dollars to do something smart and renewable, and then you've gotten blocked by somebody next door without any pretense. So the idea here with this proposed ordinance, and it's not something unique, it's been done in many other communities, as I've found out through research. Couple things though, they're not one size fits all. Depending on where you're at, what kind of a city you're in, what kind of land you have available, what the spacing are in different businesses, things like that, these kinds of ordinances can look differently. So that's kind of down into the resolve piece here. But in effect, the premise of this whole ordinance was we need to be a little bit smarter about land use planning with respect to renewables if we expect people to invest monies and not have any protections at all. So that's the premise behind it. I think Shoshana Linsky, Commissioner Linsky brought up a good point last December, which is we need to balance overly restricting development in the city because we do have limited space. And so we have seen a lot of vertical growth in our downtown. We're gonna see more of that. And not all of that can be planned in advance. So we need to be careful about not eliminating the option of going vertical. We just need to make sure that we've thought about it holistically. So the premise here is not, in this resolution, is not to solve this tonight, but simply to have folks involved in looking at what we can do to add some resolution behind it. So the proposal, and I'd rather not read this, I'll probably put people to sleep, but what I can do is provide a synopsis. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so in effect, the state of Michigan, Washtenaw County, and city of Ann Arbor don't really have any kind of ordinance preventing somebody adjacent to your property building something that would block your solar access. And whereas the city decided that renewable energy is important and having individual landowners build renewable energy on their facilities, predominantly involving solar, that we need to have some kind of ordinance-driven idea that prevents just without consequence somebody doing that. So the last whereas I've added, just to make sure it's clear that what we're after here is to avoid shading. In the resolution, what I'm proposing is that the city council direct city administrator, city planning manager to work with Energy Commission, this body, to put our best thoughts forward on what a solar ordinance could look like, to protect existing landowners with SESs on their facilities, or to avoid having blocking very valuable potential for solar development on their land that they own. And that this be done in a fairly quick way. I didn't put a timeline on this, but I think it could be done this year, where we meet, decide maybe at a subcommittee level, working with Planning Commission and others to formulate what this might look like. At the back, on the last page of this that you're seeing in front of you, I've added a cautionary statement along the lines of what I stated earlier, which is making sure we involve a more holistic approach, that we don't simply put in barriers to development, put in smart ideas that might protect somebody investing, at the same time not limit that vertical development. And that can be done in a lot of ways. Maybe this looks at enabling a building next door to go higher, but moving the solar PV that if I'm the landowner that I built on my roof, up on the top of their roof, so it's got full access to solar radiation. So there's a lot of ways this can be handled and treated, just to avoid the loss of investment. So that's the premise here. And again, I'm proposing this be done through city council to support just a path forward. There's no cost here. I think it's fairly innocuous, and I think we can come up with something that's forward-thinking to avoid a landowner losing out on renewable energy. So that's where we're at. Questions, issues, concerns, problems?
I like it a lot. I really do. This is the kind of thing that we should be doing. We do have staff working with this commission, and so perhaps we want to also include the Office of Sustainability and the city attorney. If we're going to get the council to weigh in on this, we should include everybody pertinent. I think that including planning is really going to get you the balance that you're talking about between not impeding vertical development at the same time that you're trying to protect, solar installations. So I think that this is well thought out. I like it a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think back to when they built one of the buildings up here on Huron, and there was a whole big problem with people's yards being shaded and old, really landmark trees being shaded to the point that they thought they were going to die.
They did die.
And so looking at the ability to create what amounts to a limit on the north side of a zoning division might be something that would be wise to look at.
Well, for example, there's some discussion about what's going to be built on the Y lot. And it could be 19 stories, which will cast a shadow all the way to Liberty Street. Now, that's just the federal building and the bus station now, but in another location downtown, you can imagine that would have a significant impact on other people's property. And there are properties like the current library, the old credit union, and the apartment complex at William and Division, I think that is. All of those are quite likely to be redeveloped. And if they're built to the maximum that our zoning allows, everything to the north will just be shadow. So it really is going to take some good discussion as to how you balance these interests. And I think that this is a thoughtful approach to getting the right people at the table to try to balance those interests.
Other
Do we need a
comments or
motion
questions?
to consider the resolution and then have
Yes, that's absolutely right.
what we should be doing, right? Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion for this resolution.
I guess I should make that motion.
Yes,
since
I
wrote the
think so.
darn thing. Thank you. I second.
Okay, discussion.
I agree entirely with Councilmember Eaton's comments. I think this is something that we should definitely support. I have a couple of minor suggestions in terms of the text. Councilman Eaton suggested adding the Office of Sustainability and Innovation. Probably makes sense.
Yes.
But I think also in terms of commissions, in addition to the Energy Commission, we should add Planning Commission. So the Energy and Planning Commissions. And my experience, very limited in dealing with the Planning Commission. So I'm on a working group that's developing a lighting ordinance. The Planning Commission defines its priorities every year, and then they dedicate their resources to those top priorities. And that's why the lighting ordinance is not a subcommittee of the Planning Commission, because they had already defined their priorities, and we were able to recruit some people and develop sort of a working group that's working on it in parallel. But if we want the Planning Commission to work on this, they need to be named in here, and we need to get on their priority list. The other thing that I would suggest we do, and I don't know what the appropriate time frame would be, but thinking in terms of SMART goals, the T at the end means time-bound, and I think it would make sense that we include something in here in terms of timing. You know, this could happen in 1 year, as you suggested. It could happen in 5 years. It could happen in 100 years. You know, this resolution doesn't say anything about what our expectation is or our hope is in terms of the time frame for doing this. And so I recommend that we include at least some kind of time frame that then could, once enacted by council, could be then reflecting their and planning commission's priorities, but at least have a statement in here that says something about timing.
Can I respond to that?
Please.
In terms of adding more entities to address this, my thought was keep the group smaller and then expand it and socialize it amongst all the commissions, departments, and folks. And particularly, not to say that this is wrong, but the city attorney may be too early at this stage, other than maybe, is it totally out of bounds, or is it, you know, realistic to go this route? I assume that eventually an ordinance goes through everybody anyway.
But if we're gonna, if the council is gonna direct action, we should be kind of comprehensive.
Okay.
That doesn't mean everybody has to be at the table at the first meeting.
Okay.
It just means that when the planning and the energy commission call on the city attorney's office to assist, that you have this resolution behind you to say and see, you know, this is what council wants you to do.
On the timing front, I was going to also suggest maybe we recommend this activity take place, and since it doesn't have an official body at this juncture, that it would sunset after 1 year if nothing gets done, but I don't have a real time constraint right now, so I don't have an idea
Right.
on what that might look like.
I personally was thinking in terms of like 12 to 18 months, and that could be modified by council, you know, once they consider this. What we put in here is not going to be binding for council, but at least there's a statement in here that bounds the activity with time, or at least sets a goal, and then they could modify whether 12 or 18 months is reasonable, or whether it should be 36 months, or whether it should be 6 months. But just to leave it out doesn't really give a sense of priority and what kind of time frame we're looking at. In terms of the lighting ordinance, in working on it, the experience that we have is that it's taking us about 10 months to basically get one in place, and we were, like this case, able to draw on some existing ordinances from other cities and other entities. So I think it would be probably a whole lot different here. And this does become complicated, especially with Planning Commission in terms of the kinds of things Councilman Eaton talked about, because it overlaps with zoning laws and a bunch of other things. This is not something simple where we just say, here's an ordinance from someplace else, and it should therefore, if it worked there, it'll work in Ann Arbor. It's not going to be quite that simple.
So as far as timing, I think that you just make up a couple numbers, and council will amend it according to the advice they get from staff.
Right.
But I would actually suggest, when I say a couple of numbers, I mean some milestones along the way. So like, say, 4 months out, we get a report back
On the feasibility, for example, or something
on the
like that.
status of it, and a timeline from that point going forward, or
Good.
something, you know.
Right.
But having not put any thought into that, I don't know the language you want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But if we pass this, and then some of you make some suggestions to me when I draw up the council resolution,
Mm-hmm.
I would just put that language in.
That's a good idea.
Because I believe, A, you want to direct somebody to do something, and
Yes.
B, you want to give them a time frame.
Indeed.
And I prefer to press them on the time so that they push back if it's too restrictive, but if it's not, then you get something sooner.
Agreed.
That's good.
So
Other comments?
then my ask is, I hope that you pass this tonight, but my ask is that you'll then somebody will draft some language on you know, some milestones.
So, well, don't
Friendly
we vote on
amendment
this
that
next
can be-
time, or is this the time?
Well, it'll be for the council.
He brought it up last time, right? So we can
He
vote on
did
this tonight?
bring it up last time, so it could be voted on this time. I think in the future, they're trying to get us to have these ordinances enough ahead of time that they can be on Legistar and be on the agenda and connected.
I'm going to talk about that after we talk about these things, okay?
So if we're gonna vote on this, there's the paragraph, first paragraph has some logic disconnects here. So I'm suggesting that we just change a couple words here, Chuck, and say is, whereas neither the state of Michigan, Washtenaw County, or the city of Ann Arbor have adopted any, instead of whereas the state of Michigan, Washtenaw County, nor the city of Michigan have not adopted. It's,
Yeah.
That's the way it was drafted the first time, but some stenographer overruled the guy who wrote it. so
oh, right, that's
sorry
right.
about it.
So these are my notes. So,
I think he's going back to your original language, and you should agree with him.
Yeah, I did, it's friendly enough, I'm good with it. Yeah, the stenographer was right.
so any other, I guess, changes?
I have some, I just want to share some comments that similar to what I shared last time. And Chuck, I appreciate, that you acknowledge those concerns. I think you tried to address them in that last paragraph. But I just, as I read this, I remain concerned that as the Energy Commission bringing this forward, we are not bounding this, and obviously anybody can go start working on this ordinance, right? So it's not like we can direct what happens, but I would like to see us bound this with what we believe to be the right principles going into how we address this. Because, if I think a little bit of, I'm going to give the analogy of Germany, which had these principles, how they wanted to go after energy issues as being pro-renewables and anti-nuclear, and they went after both of those and ended up with zero impact on their greenhouse gas emissions. I think we could go into this and have the Energy Commission's perspective on this be pro-renewables, so protecting solar rights, and you could have planning and other committees or public input that is looking to maintain some of the character of Ann Arbor, which we know there is opposition to some large growth. And in the end, you would balance those two out, and you would actually see that we might really be hurting ourselves by enacting this in terms of our community's greenhouse gas emissions. And I think as a commission that we have talked in the past about ultimately what we're trying to do, our number one goal, the unifying theme, is we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector. And I guess I would just feel so much more comfortable with this, because I support the idea completely in theory, but I would feel so much more comfortable if we put that as like the defining principle. Otherwise, I'm just afraid we could end up helping renewables and actually seeing our greenhouse gases in our community worsen by limiting development that is probably the single most critical factor to our, it's undoubtedly the single most critical factor to our community's greenhouse gas emissions. We could build solar off-site in big open fields where these shading issues aren't an issue. We can't build a 17-story housing outside of Ann Arbor and get the benefits of having people who can work and live and commute via walking or biking or bus. And so I just worry about the potential risks from that.
Yeah, well, and you know me, I'm 100% behind large-scale solar. That's where costs and efficiencies of scale and everything else are realized. I'm in this ordinance protecting people that invested. A Mark Clevey who put solar on his roof, and then somebody like comes along and puts an apartment building next to him. And frankly, that's
Plants
fine.
a tree that's going to grow to 100 and whatever feet. And
Well, and perhaps that's fine from a CO2 perspective, but it certainly isn't going to look very good for the person who invested $20,000 on the roof.
Okay.
So there's an easy solution to that, and the easy solution is you want to do the apartment building, you have to do something to help out the guy who put the money into the roof. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I completely support that as an idea, as a solution. I think as this is written, I worry that it doesn't provide the right level of guidance about making sure that the ordinance that comes out of this, the proposed ordinance, would need to not inadvertently be causing greenhouse gas emissions by trying to solve this renewable access issue.
So I think that's the importance of including so many different points of view here. Most likely, you know, if you had a 2-story house downtown and you put in a solar installation, and then someone wanted to build a taller building that would shade your house, under whatever scheme we end up with, they would just have to buy you out. Maybe even include the solar on top of their building to displace, you know, the energy that you are, or to replace the energy you were producing that they're now going to block. I think that's the importance of having Planning Commission at the table for this, and not have too many preconceived ideas, is because we're going to balance those issues. They are very pro-dense development, and so they're not going to let something come out of our cooperation that precludes development. They're just not going to do that. On the other hand, we can still protect somebody. Let's say you have a 15-story building and you put solar panels on top of it, and somebody comes along and builds 19 stories and blocks it. They may owe you something if you applied for solar access when you built, when you installed yours. So, you know, that's the kind of balance that we're probably going to discuss. And I don't have a preconceived notion as to what that will look like at the end, but I think that we have the right actors at the table to talk about it. Because I don't think that we're going to agree to anything that is too lopsided in favor of the next development, and planning's not going to accept anything that's too lopsided in favor of preventing development. And I think that's going to come to a balance.
I think the attorney's office would also keep it from happening as well. Because I think that there's some taking that happens when you preclude them to build to what the zoning allows.
Those radicals like my son who live in Boulder have come up with a way to do this, so I think we can.
Yeah. Well, they limit all building to 6 stories there. But they have mountains to look at.
My personal opinion is, I agree with Councilmember Eaton. This isn't prescriptive right now. It says only that it will consider the following best practices. So it's not yet bounding the proposed ordinance and saying A is a priority over B, and we're not even going to mention D, E, and F. That's where I had a sense what you're doing is trying to bound this already and draw sort of a window around it in terms of saying these are our goals and these others are not our goals. I think all it says is consider these things, work with these key stakeholders. There will be other stakeholders that will have to be involved with the process, but these are the key stakeholders: the administrator, the planning manager, the city attorney's office, the Office of Sustainability and Innovation, I think was mentioned, and then the Energy Commission and the Planning Commission. And I think your concerns need to be and will be brought up during the drafting process.
They're very legitimate and good concerns.
Yes.
I think we all agree that we don't want to.
We don't want the wrong outcome.
Yeah, I think everybody's got the same idea here. I just, this will be my last comment on this point. I feel like since this is coming from the Energy Commission, like most of our resolutions, we explain what we are trying to accomplish with them. And I fear that what this says it's trying to accomplish is that it's trying to accomplish preserving solar access, as opposed to what I think all of our goals is to accomplish solar access while preserving or improving greenhouse gas emissions. And because I think there's so much of a potential conflict in this, that's where I feel like it's maybe worth spelling that out.
Well, you have the second whereas statement, which says that, you know, why are we doing this? And it says we have a climate action plan which is committed to reducing community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. So in a sense, that is saying this activity of developing a solar access ordinance should be something in support of the climate action plan and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It doesn't say it exactly the way I did, but the fact that it's mentioned in the whereas clause, I think, says that that should be something that is considered in the drafting of the ordinance. Does that somewhat address your concern?
Yeah.
I think we've already conceded that we might go through this process and get to 12 to 18 months out and not have an ordinance at all.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that's quite
this may
possible.
be an impossible task.
Yeah.
But I really think that the biggest impact this will have is in residential neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Not precluding high-rises, because it's not zoned for that, but just simply trying to get neighbors to get along with each other once you've spent the money on a solar installation.
Well, and there has been a tendency for people to build larger and larger houses on smaller and smaller lots. And the neighbors to the north quite often end up in their shadow, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
And I think you've heard me say this really makes me mad, and why I want to do this is because one of the nice solar PV plus thermal designs that I worked on is no longer functional because we didn't have something protecting it. So the owner is suffering from that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't think it's right.
No,
I think there could have been an easy solution that would have benefited both parties.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions before we put this to a vote? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously.
So I think the action then is I got Mark's comments, I took a few of my own. I think they're all friendly amendments. I'll redraft this if you want me to recirculate it out with the notes, minutes.
I think the intent was clear.
Pass these down. The next thing on this list is this thing I'm handing out now. I don't know whether to call this introduce it as a resolution for adoption later, or mostly it's just an advice, and I'm looking, I think, as a sense of the commission in support of the idea for the Office of, the Energy Office and the Office of Sustainability. I don't think we need to cycle this through the City Commission, but if necessary, I guess we would do it that way. So let me just, if we can bypass the resolution part and just say, yeah, we agree with this, and hand it over to Josh tonight, I'd be satisfied. So here's the issue. As we're looking at doing solar and stuff like that, we keep coming back to the same thing, that the only definitive document we have about solar potential in Ann Arbor was the 2016 Solar Development Ready Community Report that we did. John Mirsky worked on this a lot, if you recall, and we came up with the 8% of the goal, the solar goal by 2015, 25% reduction by 225, and 90% by 250 relative to the 2000 baseline carbon dioxide equivalent. When we run those numbers, we get 24 megawatts of solar by 2025 at a rate of 2.4 or 2.5 megawatts a year. In Ann Arbor, we are woefully behind in that. And there's been some other things that have changed since this report came out. Josh updated the emissions report, and we have a better assessment now on the potential for energy efficiency impacts on the emissions reductions in, which is about half of what was in the Climate Action Plan. So I think it's this purpose of this thing is to update our solar targets and to refine them down. We say there's 78 megawatts of solar potential in Ann Arbor. To me, if that's the potential, we need to figure that out, get a little bit closer and start looking at that. So what I'm suggesting is I'll just read it, it's pretty straightforward. And we're advising the Ann Arbor Energy Office and Office of Sustainability to undertake the following solar targeting and planning activities in 2019. One, based on the new emissions and energy efficient data, update the solar energy targets that were put forth in the Energy Commission's Solar Development Ready Community Report to Council and stuff. Use the current solar energy potential information from sources such as PV Watts, et cetera, to update the geostellar solar potential thing that we did back in 2016. It may not need to be updated at all, but we should look to see if there is a need to update the solar potential either up or down. And that solar potential analysis is there, listed there, the LiDAR-based analysis of Ann Arbor's addressable solar market. This is the only thing that we have that identifies the total potential and gives us any sense of how much we're talking about per site class. 3, that they then conduct a feasibility study on each of these site classes to determine estimates for and options for how and how much the solar potential can be reached with either distributed generation or the purchase of either with third-party solar owned or on-site stuff, or through a purchase agreement with DTE-owned solar power for large solar arrays that are outside of city limits. 4, establish solar outreach education assistance programs for each of the non-DTE utility portion of the solar potential for each site class. For example, we have a Solar Faithful program that is working on the assumption that 1 megawatt of solar potential in Ann Arbor lies in the faith community. We also have numbers for the city buildings, so in some place we ought to be able to refine the site class targets here and say, you know, how close are we going to get to 29.7 megawatts of solar within a period of time once we max out the programs that we have. And lastly, that the office present their new solar targeting plans and provide a solar plan, regular solar plan to outcomes to John's SMART goals. We start looking at what we're doing in relation to these outcome by sectors instead of saying we're going to get 25 megawatts to 25 megawatts when we really don't know if that's even technically possible to do. So we come up with a plan and that they report that back to us. So when we talk about resolutions and stuff, we have something to target to shoot at other than this geostellar 24 megawatts target. And that they report back to us on a regular basis about how they're doing it. So that's the idea here is we did this before because we didn't have the capacity inside the energy office to do this work. We have that now. So instead of us having to go back through this and grabbing John and tying him up in a room and redoing all these numbers, we'd like to encourage Josh and his office and Mindy to take this on so that it helps us be more targeted in our advisory function going forward. So I don't know if we need this in a form of a resolution. It's, update the report, refine the report, come up with some better understanding of how much of this we could actually do with distributed generation versus having to work with DTE, and establish some programs accordingly and figure out what the plan is, tell us what the plan is, and then tell us how to do it on the plan. That's what it comes down
I'm a little confused by some of this.
to. Okay.
On number 1,
Yep.
you start talking about percentages there that are actually the percentages of greenhouse gas reduction
Yeah.
or not.
They're not the solar.
They're not the
They're
solar.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's right. That's the solar.
So
Greenhouse gas.
I'd probably take that out of the thing. And then there's this chart that you have down below. If the 97,600 megawatt hours is produced by an output of 78.5 megawatts of solar, then 25% of that is 9.6 megawatts, not 35.
So this is the report we got back from GeoStellar.
Well, I actually put
Yes.
this slide together.
Okay.
So
John,
Wayne, do you want to go through all your points, or do you want me to just go ahead and jump in on this particular point? Was that your second point, or?
That's my second point. And I have some other things to say about it,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
Well, let me address this at 30,000 feet and then your specific comments. So first of all, I support Mark's general thrust, but I'm wondering if this is best handled in a meeting with Missy. So a couple of concerns that I have, and I'll piggyback on Wayne's in terms of some of the specifics here. First of all, I'm not sure that the Energy Office actually has the capacity to handle this right now. So, you know, we have Josh and Emily. Emily, I understand, is got some time off in terms of family leave kind of issues. So we have limited capacity. And my understanding, and Josh, maybe you can speak to this, that there is a plan to hire another individual, but that's not really going to be an energy expert. It's going to be a community outreach and communications type of person. So I don't know if we're going to have additional capacity in the area that we need in terms of really analyzing these numbers. And therefore, I think it may make sense that we talk and deal with this with Missy. As far as Wayne's comments, just to piggyback on those and explain those a little bit. First of all, as Wayne said, in the first point, those numbers are from the cap. And what we did to generate the target that you talked about, Mark, which is the 24 megawatts between 2015 and 2025, is we made the assumption that 80% of the reductions in greenhouse gases would come from energy efficiency and 20% would come from renewables. We know in Ann Arbor, renewables basically means solar. And so from that, we derived the target 24 megawatts, which is the 2.4 megawatts per year target that we've been talking about. I agree with you that as we learn more, it makes sense to reevaluate that whole equation. Is 80% realistic and 20% realistic? Should it be 90-10? Should it be 50-50? And I think we also need to consider, if we want to reach our targets, you know, should we be putting as much focus on on energy efficiency as we are on solar, because we know energy efficiency costs less per watt than in solar. So the whole topic, I think, needs to be discussed. We need to discuss it in the context of capacity, in the context of expertise, in the context of whether or not we can draw on resources outside the city. Missy might be able to help us with that. So she might say, well, I don't, but I can use C's resources or something else, interns, to get this done. So I think in a meeting, we could have that kind of catchball that we can't necessarily have here. As far as the middle of the page under point 2, GeoStellar provided this analysis when we were in the early days of discussing the program that we had within them, what was it called again? The Ann Arbor Solar, what was it? No, not Solar for All. In any case, the program that we introduced, the Solar Club in 2017. And they gave us this breakdown by ward and then also by sector or site class. And as far as some of the conversions and things like that, I'd have to go back and look at those, Wayne. Those are some of your comments about how these were translated. But I think the point is, again, going back up to 30,000 feet, it makes sense to reevaluate all this in terms of what are the right numbers, how should it be split, what capacity do we have, and what should the priorities be. And I think that's your main thrust, and that I agree with.
Yes, I do too.
I think especially with the fact that Missy's now on board and she's going to be looking for ways to justify her budgets and stuff. And Jack has been very clear that programs and ideas and things that we bring forward should have metrics and have as much specificity as possible. So if we're going to, right now we are throwing all our limited solar eggs in the residential solar basket without an idea that, other ways that we could be looking at doing this. So I think how we do that, is take the sense of this thing, and I could simply turn this over to Missy and say, we'd like to talk to you about this. I'm happy to do that. In fact, that's what I'm trying to do, is move the conversation. So
I'm glad you brought it
how
up.
do we?
We should probably.
We did do a little bit of an analysis on this. We looked at Google Sunroof, PV watts, and kind of a comparison of all of them. Google Sunroof was, in the stadium was lit up for solar potential, so it wasn't very accurate. And in fact, this was kind of, I think, out of all of them, we did a quick analysis, I think probably close to a year ago now, on PV watts to see how close we could get to this number, and it came out relatively close.
Yeah.
So as far as and I think this was actually, I wasn't part of the group, but I think it was LiDAR data that they used to get this information.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think as of right now, this is probably the most accurate numbers that we do have. I don't know if that means 78 megawatts should be the target, trying to get everything in the city, and that's something that I talked to you about, Mark, versus this 24. I know that also 80% for energy efficiency is quite high on the breakdown. I mean, we've seen a maximum of 30%, and even with advancements, I can't see that going more than maybe 40, even 50 is the highest. So, I mean, maybe in that sense, we could kind of do a recalculation on this. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's something where perhaps it would be.
Just a point
Yeah.
of clarification. The 24 megawatts was only between 2015 and 2025.
Okay.
So if you look out to the 90% by 2050, that's a much higher number than 24, 25 megawatts.
Okay.
And the 78 is the total potential, assuming, the city boundaries don't grow or the roof surfaces and things like that. And that's not going to change all that much between now and 2050, probably not. It may change somewhat, but, we're not, if we replace a one-story building with a flat roof, with a 17-story building with a flat roof, the solar potential of that flat roof hasn't really changed. And that's in this 78.
The energy consumption of that building may have changed.
But the energy consumption has changed dramatically, true.
The other wrinkle in this number is that it doesn't include sites outside of Ann Arbor city boundaries.
Correct.
And we have been looking currently at things like Wheeler, things like the landfill, the airport, all those areas. So this is where it's complicated by the fact that we don't really know the full potential for looking outside of the boundaries, especially if we're, as it says here, even looking for third-party owned systems and other kind of.
Yeah. I think we need to question these numbers too, but looking at them again with some new knowledge that I think I and others have. The fact that the university only was 3% of the potential, and I think the university, Jack, you probably know, owns something like 30, 40% of the property area in the city?
11%.
Oh, is only 11%?
Really?
A university.
Yeah.
All of the public land in Ann Arbor may amount to 30%.
Okay, okay.
That
But still, it's still 3% compared to whatever it is, 11%. So it still gets back to this whole thing of reevaluating this holistically.
So I think also just a comment that to Commissioner Levinsky's point, that we don't have an answer for how we're going to reduce the emissions. We kind of agree that there's a emissions, greenhouse, climate change is a problem, that there is this emissions thing, the Climate Action Plan gives us some goals, and we can't answer the question, how is renewables going to do this in Ann Arbor, other than this chart. And so I think we need to get down to, we need 50 megawatts, and we can only get 20 out of distributed generation inside the city, and so we got to get 30 from someplace else. Where we're going to get it from, either a township, or we're going to buy it from Celine, who's going to put up 100 megawatts worth of plant with Consumers Energy, or we're going to negotiate something with DTE, but some answer has to, we got to come up with some answer. And updating this, I think, is at least gets us to the right questions. Yes, Chuck?
The engineer in me hates this because there's no units. What's a megawatt? AC, DC? We got to get into that boat. So we got to tighten that up. The 3% on U, 2.9% U of M, that's not, I've done my own studies, and that's not right.
Okay, good.
The solar potential, recognize too that it's not just a matter of going on PV watts and saying, oh, there's a roof area and it can generate X number of kilowatt hours. There's lots of other parameters that come into what's potentially viable. And my takeaway on this is we're in the right space. We need to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
We don't have resources at the Office of Sustainability level. Do we have resources at the commission level? And if not, then the only other answer is going outside and hiring a third party, which I absolutely hate. Everybody knows
Yeah.
that. Even though I was a consultant and loved to do the work when I was a consultant, but I hate to do it now. Anyway, so the point is, does it make sense for this commission to taking this to another level, working with the Office of Sustainability, and we're the gatekeepers, and/or the secondary piece of this is, I've worked on a number of different studies with U of M as a graduate advisor. There's all kinds of students wanting to do this kind of work. So there's opportunities here. Adam French would be one person I would reach out to,
Yeah.
and others that would take this on.
And I think that could be discussed in a meeting where it could be more interactive,
I agree.
as opposed to trying to do it sort of formally here in amongst the commissioners.
So do you think that should be a work session where we invite our sustainability manager?
For example, yes.
Yeah.
I guess on the other end of things, with the resources that we have and the progression that we're making, and I wouldn't spend too much time trying to determine what these maximums are. You know, in some respects, creating programs that work us in that direction is more important than figuring
I
out
agree.
what the maximums are.
I agree.
But
I guess if the Office of Sustainability came to the city commission, or city council, with a budget request to put together a new program, and this was the justification that was attached to it, I'm not sure that that would be adequate for Jack's purposes to say, yes, let's go develop a commercial solar plan as you've outlined in your budget request. So let's at least see if we can get it tighter.
Well, I guess what I was getting at was that if we're working on, at the level we're working at now, where we're working at getting very small percentages, understanding what the total possible could be in, especially in 2050,
Right.
is just a pencil exercise.
I'm fully with you, Wayne. I think asking our limited resources to do additional studies when we know that we just need more.
Yeah.
And whether it's on rooftops or whether it's third-party owned and it's outside city limits, we need more. I'd rather they be working on the strategy for how we're gonna get the money to do it, because we know what we need to do, you know, as our next incremental step.
The
Some
other
point
thing
we
that
might-
happens over time is how much we're actually using in energy is going to change, either up or down, fairly significantly probably, and the efficiency of equipment. I mean, just in the 2 years since this data was produced, the average installed PV panel has gone from probably 275 watts to 300 watts.
I think the efficiency now is up to 19% average
Yeah.
new
So,
installed
and
efficiency.
although there are limits to that,
Yeah.
it will go up somewhat.
And that's my point on potential, because I just did a study for a major manufacturer, and we did that exact thing. We, instead of going solar first, we did energy efficiency first. Where can we drive his load down to?
Yeah.
And that's
Exactly.
now what do we need to do? Made a lot of sense,
Yeah.
from a CO2 point of view and lots of other perspectives.
Well, I'll then take that as a ringing endorsement of the 2016 Solar Development Ready Community Report as it stands now, and invite people to come to the meeting on Friday if you'd like to talk about volunteer labor, putting solar on the fire stations, and hopefully in the next 2 years we'll get solar on a bunch of them, and let's get out there and start putting solar up.
I'll be there.
Do that. Great, thank you.
No, it's good stuff to look at as well, too. It's important to realize that. On to committee updates.
So before we go to committee updates, could I
Sure.
weigh in? On December 3rd, City Council passed a resolution asking all boards and commissions to follow procedures on agendas and minutes. And basically, it says commissions and committees will consistently publicize agendas in advance of their meetings, consistent with the practices of the City Council. So council typically posts its agenda the Thursday evening before a Monday meeting. You know.
Friday.
We, in the past, have talked about our bylaws, but we still haven't sent anything to council. On January 7th, yesterday, City Council adopted the Environmental Commission's bylaws. And in their bylaws, they require that an agenda and all the materials they'll be used in a meeting be posted 48 hours before a meeting. You know. I would just point out that if you go to Legistar right this moment and download the agenda, it's a previous version. It's not the version that we had on the desk tonight. And you have to download the agenda and use the links in the agenda rather than find things on Legistar in order to download the presentations and stuff. So I hope that we'll pass bylaws soon. I hope that we will post agendas and materials in advance of meetings so that if anybody is interested in the topics that we're going to discuss, that they can see it on Legistar and attend meetings. And it's generally available to all of us before a meeting, you know.
Well, I think that it would be great if we could just make a rule that we give everything to Josh a week in advance.
That would be very helpful.
You know,
Usually what I have to do is I'll put a draft of it up,
Right.
waiting for things to come in and then update it as resolutions and things come in. So yeah, that would be very helpful. The other thing is next meeting will be addressing bylaws. So
Okay,
that's the
very,
other
very good.
thing we got.
By the way, I agree 100%. That good meeting practices take time, and they're going to take mostly your time, but they're going to save everybody's time. You know, in multiples of time.
But I want to emphasize what Josh just said,
Yeah.
which is that we owe him
Absolutely.
the obligation of giving him this stuff far enough in advance. Now, even City Council adds stuff after the initial posting of an agenda, which I would discourage you from adapting our practices. But I would certainly hope that at least an initial version of a resolution is available at the same time as the agenda and things like that. And that really is going to require that we all be very considerate of his time, because it does take time to do all this on our behalf.
oh yeah, no, I agree. Committee updates. I don't believe most of these committees have been meeting since the last Energy Commission meeting.
We have our
Right.
next committee meeting next Tuesday, so everything was adopted as far as the calendars, and things will start rolling from there.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
But there may be a few things that might be updated. I know there's been some input from the some people on the EV ordinance. You want to say anything about
Carlene or-
the fast charging?
The conversation, I think, would be better, like, if we discuss it in committee
Okay.
before,
Okay.
like, bringing it forth, just, it's things that have been proposed.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you for, you went to Lansing and partook of a meeting up there dealing with the fast charging that's
Yes,
coming down the pike with the Volkswagen money.
right.
So,
And it's one of the
thank
things
you.
that we're looking at, how to address that, and if it's going to be within the EV ordinance committee or
Yeah,
in another manner. But yes, Ann Arbor is one of the cities that is being considered to have DC fast chargers installed in the highway, along the highways
Mhm.
that are in Ann Arbor, going around Ann Arbor, yeah.
So the other thing that I would highly recommend people to do, if you haven't signed up to be on committees, I said plural, I strongly recommend that you do so we can have as much combined effort on getting these things done this year as we can.
Josh, remind me where these subcommittee meetings will be held, here or the workroom?
Workroom, for the most part, yeah, the calendars have asterisks where the workroom was taken, so that will be usually basement. But outside of that, for the most part, you can assume it'll be in the workroom.
Are you going to issue meeting invitations via Outlook for all of them? Or have you
Yes.
done that already? I don't think I have.
Yes. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do the
Yeah.
calendar invites, so you guys all
Yep.
have those.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and I've heard from a bunch of you guys, so I appreciate it, as far as which ones you want to be a part of.
Great. Moving right along.
So I think, just generally, all of these are meeting on Tuesdays now.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So every Tuesday of the month, there
At
is an
6
Energy
o'clock.
Commission-related meeting at 6 o'clock,
Yep.
correct?
Yeah, there's a request
Yep.
based off of parking and some other things, we do it at 6.
Right. The one exception is the lighting ordinance, where there's a separate working group where we have our own meeting scheduled.
Yep.
Public input. We still have some public out there.
So one more thing before we
Oh.
move on. The Environmental Commission did pass the resolution on declaring a climate emergency. I'll be bringing forward a resolution for Energy Commission, I hope to adopt at the next meeting, that uses all of those whereas clauses. That's a pretty good history of everything that we've expressed our intent to do, with some resolve clauses that actually direct the city administrator to do some things. And so,
That'd be nice.
I'll circulate that before the next meeting. I do want to give direction, and I would appreciate some input. I think that beyond doing what we can as an entity to reduce our carbon emissions, we really have to encourage the residents of our town to look at their consumer activities and their own carbon footprint. You know, we're 2% of the emissions in town.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to make any real headway, it's going to be an outreach program. It's not going to just be solar panels, but it's really going to be to get people to understand the consequences of a consumer society. So I hope that we can address both our own energy use, but also what we need to do looking outward to try to accomplish something.
Good.
Perhaps we could also get an update about the GE's program, outreach program, where you're comparing the energy usage of people in neighborhoods. I know I get a report regularly. You introduced that to us about a year ago. And
The energy efficiency teams?
yeah, sometime in the future, just how is that outreach going?
Sure,
There was
sure.
it was an experiment, I think. You guys are trying that, and part of it's comparing individuals, comparing their house to their neighbors, kind of thing. And just, you know, is that
Providing
working?
that data.
Is that a good idea? And how, to Jack's point, you know, what can be done? Maybe an update on what's happening. You got findings on, is it working or not? Or?
All right, yeah.
Great.
I know I get things regularly, and I'm always amazed that I have the worst performing house in the neighborhood. I have that, I'm sure.
We also have a presentation from Howard next meeting as well, on budget and,
Ah.
upcoming budget.
Oh, good.
Oh, good,
That
good.
should be,
Other things for next agenda?
I'm tracking pretty closely on what's going on with solar tax stuff, so I mean, I could probably
Okay.
report on what's happening.
Okay.
We're having a meeting on this tomorrow, and I know I'm working with Jeff Irwin's office. He's already working with, got a number of Republicans
Great.
lined up, so
Great.
there's
Okay.
movement on this.
Okay. Well, if people have things that they think of after we've closed out this meeting, just email them along so that we can include them in the next agenda. And I will call this meeting to adjournment at,
Actually, I interrupted you when you called for public comment, and so I'm not sure that.
well, I didn't see anybody get up, so I.
Well, I'll say something.
Oh, okay.
I'm wondering why I'm the token member of the public. I'm really just here
Come to the
today.
microphone.
Come to the microphone, so.
Oh, no, you can hear me.
No, but the people can't hear you at home.
Okay.
Don't be bashful.
I just came to learn more about what you all are doing here, and I've been impressed. It's nice to hear that. And I would respond to what you're saying about getting the public involved. that's why I'm here. I mean, I'd love to do an electric car and I'd love to do solar panels, but I don't really know how to go about it. And, you know, so I'm trying to get information about that. And so I'm really just here to learn. And
Okay.
How do you think we did?
well, good. There's a lot of good ideas. But I do understand that we're really not making as much progress as we had hoped, like on the plan that's been put, the action plan that's put in place.
Very true.
And so there's got to be some way. Or specifically, I remember going to meetings about the solar club, and it just seemed to fall apart or something, and, you know, so I think there's interest out there in the public, but somehow there needs to be more direction or something to get people to actually take active steps. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
That sounds like we need to get going on our listening tour,
Yes.
There you go.
because that's exactly the kind of comments that we want to get and be able to interact with and provide advice to. What is the status of that, if I can ask informally? You talked about it in the last couple of meetings, and I haven't heard anything since early December.
So I'm having a meeting, Missy had some budget things and things over to end up the last year. We're now in the front of the new year. That's one of the meetings we're having to describe. She's on the same track to get these listening meetings going, hopefully through the first quarter's done.
Okay.
So that's the goal.
So the idea for those out in the public realm here is we're planning on going to various places around the community and listening to people and finding out what they think they need as far as energy and the environment, basically. So,
And to that point, as you wander out into the various wards, I would encourage you to contact the council members in that ward before you
Absolutely.
plan a date or a place.
Yes.
It's captured in the minutes.
Yes.
Yes.
And I forwarded that specifically to Missy, so she's aware of this too.
great. Well, if there are no other comments or input for the next agenda, I will now call this meeting adjourned at exactly 8 o'clock.